As I was saying, I'm going to now introduce the one, the incomparable, the purple hostess with the spiritual mostess, the girl whose main inspiration are the three wise men, Larry, Curly, and Moe, Vaishali.
Accent went from Swedish to Indian to Swedish. So, how many of you here have heard of Emanuel Swedenborg? Okay, it's probably because yeah, as the stomach turns. Emanuel with two M's, Swedenborg, Sweden like the country, and then B-O-R-G. Probably if you heard of Swedenborg, it's because I've cornered you and twisted your arm and forced you to listen to my unending pontification about Emanuel Swedenborg. So let me formally introduce you to Emanuel Swedenborg, and you'll be really thrilled because you can go home and you can get out your calendar and you can put a gold star on it because today's the day that you got introduced to my boyfriend, Emanuel Swedenborg. And Emanuel Swedenborg lived from 1688 to 1772. He lived for 80-some years. And I refer to him as my other boyfriend. I have a boyfriend that has a body, and then I have a boyfriend who doesn't have a body. And Emanuel is a boyfriend that doesn't have a body. But it's very handy to have a boyfriend like Emanuel, ladies. And after I get done, if you decide you want to make him your boyfriend too, I'm sure he'd be willing to share more love. But the nice thing about having a boyfriend like Swedenborg who doesn't have a body is I don't have to pick up after him, and I always know where he's at. Thanks for coming. You got a cute face. Wondering if I'm going to zoom in on you, Norman, aren't you? Keep breathing, it's okay. So Emanuel Swedenborg is born in 1688 in Stockholm, Sweden. And his dad is a minister of a Lutheran church in Sweden. And he goes to the best school. And he had a desire, since he was a small kid, to find out where the soul resides in the human experience. He really wanted to know where the soul resided in the human experience. So when he started embarking into a life of studying science, science was at its infancy. And people at that point really thought science is going to answer the problems for us that we didn't get an emotional and psychologically satisfying answer from the church from. Yeah, people thought that at one time. Interesting, huh? So Swedenborg thought this too. He thought that science perhaps was going to open a door and explain things and give people a view that would take them to a place that the organized religion hadn't taken. And he thought that he could find out where the soul resided in the human experience using science. So the guy goes off, and basically he masters every known science in his life. Now, if you haven't heard of Swedenborg, if you go home and you Google him, be prepared to be hit with a tsunami of information. Because what you're going to find out is that this guy figured out what the cerebellum is for in the human brain. He figured out what the pituitary gland is for. He wrote 4 volumes on the human brain with the most accurate drawings for his lifetime. He was a metallurgist. He wrote over 150 scientific works from color, fire, soil, unit of measure. He mastered every freaking known science in his life. And people would come to him and say, dude, so what's the point with being the terminal overachiever? Why do you have to master every known science in your life? Justin, welcome, dude. And Swedenborg would say, because I have to know where the soul resides in the human experience. So he's going on mastering every known science in his life. And since he was a small child, he'd been able to control his breathing and enter into a trance-like state of absolute concentrated focus. Now, there's some conjecture he was able to do that. By the way, that's my website. Pretty fun, huh? We'll get back to that. But he said that he was able to control his breathing since he was as early as 2 years old. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was 2 years old, I was far more interested in the contents of my diaper than I was in controlling my breath and entering into a trance-like state. So already the guy's a little different. So he's mastering every known science in his life. He's doing this daily meditation where he controls his breathing. He's 56 years old. I love this. He's 56 years old. Most of us think by the time we're 56 years old, most of the good stuff is behind us. Everything that we're going to do is meaningful, has already happened. That's what I love about Swedenborg. He's just going to blow all that crap right out of the water. So he's 56 years old, and he's traveling. And he's doing his daily meditation. Something interesting happens. And he describes it. I won't get into detail because the visual isn't really as necessary as the bottom line. So he says what happens is that there's like a rupture in time and space. And basically, he starts talking to the spiritual world. He said the spiritual world presents itself. And basically, the spiritual world comes forward and says, okay, you're probably crapping in your shorts, dude, because you're trying to figure out what the hell is going on. So let me explain what's going on. And the angels said that, announced that they were angels, and said the whole first part of your life has been training for the second part of your life. The first part has been training as a scientist. Now, the second part of your life, angels are going to come every day until you die, and we're going to take you into the spiritual world, and we're going to show you different levels of heaven and hell, and you're going to write about it, being the dispassionate scientist that you are. So for the remaining 27 years of his life, this guy wrote every day about how heaven and hell is organized. So just so we're on the same page, let's define heaven and hell, because we may have different definitions of them. Yours might be a lot more uptight than mine because you look like a really uptight dude. No, only kidding you. Just pulling your tie-dye. So Swedenborg defines heaven as a place or a state of being that is unlimited. In other words, food and thought. So heaven is a place or a state of being that is unlimited. And he defines hell as a place or a state of being that's limited. And he says nobody has to die to experience heaven and hell. Everybody in this room has experienced heaven and hell in this lifetime, depending on what you give your attention to. So Swedenborg wrote a lot about heaven and hell. And he started putting these books out, but he didn't put his name on it because he didn't feel like it was a chest-beating moment, you know? He didn't feel like, yeah, this is my information, puts his name on it. He felt like it was information that he channeled, and it was divine information, and he didn't have to put his name on it. He wasn't trying to hide. He wasn't trying to be deceptive. So he gets these books out there, and people start reading about heaven and hell. And they're wondering, who's writing this book? So the way he gets found out to be the guy writing these books is that he's traveled like 200-300 miles away from his home in Stockholm in Gothenburg. And because he was a member of Sweden's parliament, on top of everything else, he was a member of Sweden's parliament, he traveled extensively and he visited in kind of exclusive circles. So he's at this dinner party in Gothenburg, right? And the great German philosopher, Emanuel Kant, I'm sure you guys remember Emanuel Kant is a real party animal, because let's face it, when we think of a fun time, we think of German philosophers. So Emanuel Kant is there, I'm sure, with all his one-liners being a laugh riot a moment. And suddenly Swedenborg gets really agitated. And the hosts of the dinner party are concerned that maybe somebody said something to Swedenborg that was offensive. You know, maybe he got sat next to me and I opened my mouth and dropped an F-bomb. They were concerned that he was offended by what was going on in the room because he was very agitated. He kept getting up and walking around. And so when the host confronted him and said, are you upset because somebody said something offensive? He said, no, your guests are lovely people. No, nothing to do with what's going on here. Remember, this is in the 1700s. It is before mass communication. It's before Marconi. There is no wireless. There are no cell phones. There is no CNN. There's just what happens by word of mouth and horseback. So Swedenborg tells him, I'm upset because in Stockholm, remember this is almost 300 miles from where he's standing, He says, there's a huge fire in Stockholm right now, and it's burning out of control. He said, a friend of mine's house, it's burned to the ground, and he's homeless. And he said, the fire is moving in the direction of my house and my community where all my writings are. So you can imagine the people of the party are a little confused as to how he might know this. How do you know there's a fire burning 200-300 miles away right now? And Swedenborg looks at them so matter of fact and says, the angels told me. So Emanuel Kant takes out his big pen or whatever the hell uptight German philosophers write with, and he starts making notes about everything that Swedenborg is saying. Where Swedenborg says the fire started, where he said it burned, how long it burned, what it destroyed. It takes days for the news to get from Stockholm to Gutenberg. Days. When it gets there, Emanuel Kant takes out his notes and finds out that everything Swedenborg said was 100% accurate. 100%. So that's when people came to him and said, you're writing this stuff, aren't you, dude? And Swedenborg didn't hide. He wasn't trying to be deceptive. He said, yeah. So it came out that he was the one writing this. After that, people would come to him and say, look, dude, I know you talk to the angelic world. I know you've been given special permission to see the spiritual realm. I had a loved one who died. And when they died, they took some sensitive information. Can you find my loved one on the other side and find out where they left this important thing or that important thing or whatever it was? And Swedenborg was tested thousands of times before he died. He didn't answer everybody. He would go into a trance-like state, and he would ask the angels if it was in the highest and best service for him to get this information. And if the angel said, this is serving, he would go and he would get it. But the angels didn't always say that. The angels would sometimes come back and say, this is a game of mental masturbation on these people's part. They're just yanking your chain. They're just twisting your melon, dude. I didn't look at you at any particular point for the mental masturbation. That wasn't an accusation. So at any rate, that was one of my better jokes, dude. So at any rate, when Swedenborg was told this is just a mindless challenge that isn't edifying to anybody, he would come out of his trance-like state and he would say, I'm sorry, I'm not your performing monkey. I'm not going to do this for you. But when he did answer, out of the thousands of times he was tested, he was 100% accurate every single frickin' time. And if you're just making that up, that is a pretty mean trick. So I could spend the rest of the evening exhausting you with fascinating stories about his going to the spiritual world and getting information, with his exploits as a scientist. But I'm going to just beat the bushes because we want to get to Christopher and tell you my favorite Emanuel Swedenborg story. Yay for the favorite story. So, Swedenborg, being a member of Sweden's parliament, it was unusual to be a popular person in parliament. Statespeople have never really been warm and fuzzy with the people. And Swedenborg always insisted on hugging people, which in 1700s in Sweden, you just really didn't do that. So Swedenborg, even though he had a speech impediment like Thomas Jefferson, and he wouldn't speak publicly a lot, he was very quiet, so if he opened his mouth and he said something to you, there was meaning behind it. But a lot of people got to know Swedenborg and love him and respect him for who he was. So there's this big gathering, and all the Queen is there, and Swedenborg had done some, I was going to say sessions, some readings for the Queen. He got a hold of the Queen's dead brother and got some very important information for her that her dead brother, who'd been dead for quite some time, had for her. And she was so grateful for Swedenborg that she made sure that every time he wrote a book, a couple of them went into their library and that he was protected and that the church, who abandoned him a heretic, could not go after him. Personally, I don't feel that you're doing good spiritual work unless somebody banned you a heretic. So please, before I leave, one of you people call me a heretic. So at any rate, yeah, you feel free. You can pull it out now. So Swedenborg's at this event, and this guy wants to embarrass him. He's upset and jealous at all the attention Swedenborg gets. And so he thinks that this is his chance to level the playing field and embarrass Swedenborg. So he taps on the side of his glass or whatever they did in the 1700s to get people's attention in a big room. And he says, everybody, 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 We are just so fortunate to have Mr. Plugged In and Cosmic and Groovy with us, Mr. Emanuel Swedenborg, who talks to dead people. So, since we have Mr. Plugged In, Cosmic and Groovy with us, why don't we just turn to him and say, okay, dude, who's the next person in this room who's going to cack? So Swedenborg goes into a trance-like state. And it's really interesting because there are over 18 witnesses that write about this. And you want to know something that blew my mind away about these 18 witnesses that saw this? None of them reported about how the third person responded. And here's the story. The third person is the person who's getting ready to die. Swedenborg comes out of this trance, and he says, our friend Bjorn Bjornsson here is going to cross over at 5:45 in the morning. And out of all these 18 witnesses, nobody wrote down how Bjorn responded. Isn't that interesting? So I'm assuming that Bjorn must have been okay with it because he didn't run out of the room with his hair on fire. But once again, Swedenborg went inwards when he got the information. So what the angels probably told him is, he's got a limited amount of time. You need to let him know he's crossing over so he can get everything in order before tomorrow morning. Or they probably knew that Bjorn was sensing it, so it was just confirmation. But at any rate, Bjorn seems to be okay with the information, is my bottom line. So he announces Bjorn Bjornsson's going to cross over tomorrow morning at 5:45. Well, the guy who wants to embarrass Swedenborg says, everybody, you know what? It just so happens every morning I take a 5:45 a.m. morning constitutional walk just in front of our friend Bjorn's house every morning. So tomorrow at 5:45, I'll just stop in and check in on his health. Because this guy was convinced that this was some kind of elaborate setup Swedenborg had done to embarrass him when he's trying to embarrass Swedenborg. So 5:45 the next morning, he's walking over there with purpose to Bjorn's house. And when he shows up, one of the servants is running out of the house, just crying his eyeballs out. And he explains to the guy, we just found Bjorn dead. Man still doesn't believe it. He pushes his way past the servant, pushes his way past the grieving family, and announces he will only leave after he touches Bjorn's dead body himself. So I tell him, be my guest, go upstairs. So he goes upstairs. And not only has Bjorn left his shell, but the clock next to his bedside stopped at the moment that he left at 5:45 a.m. And if you are making that up and pulling it out of a hat, that is a pretty mean trick. So all I can tell you is the guy's plugged in. He's plugged in. I tell you all these stories just to give you some background about why I think the guy is important to listen to. Why I feel that in his 27 years of going to the spiritual world, he learned a lot about how to own and operate this classroom that would be imperative for us to know. But I wanted you to have a little personal introduction to him. I've written 3 books, and this one has a personal introduction. Wisdom Rising has a personal introduction to Swedenborg, as does this one, You Are What You Love. All 3 of the books are different. They're all printed in purple ink, but they all have different information in them. One is 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. The other one is green eggs and ham. No, I'm only kidding you. But of all the things that Swedenborg thought was important, the things I'm telling you about, telling who is going to be the next person to die in the room. There are a whole bunch of other stories I haven't told you about where people came and got information from him. Swedenborg didn't write anything about any of those events. He wrote over 4.5 million words. He wrote over 30 volumes of work, and he didn't write about any of those experiences because he didn't think they were important. He called them parlor tricks. But you want to know what he thought was important, that he spent the thrust of his life talking and writing about? The primary law that holds everything together in the physical and spiritual worlds, and that law is this: you are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to. You are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to. When I first heard about this law, I was in my 20s, and I was diagnosed as terminal from internal organ complications because my internal organs were shutting down. They were rotting literally inside my body, which is it's unpleasant. And I was trying to figure out how I got there because Western medicine was not very useful in that arena. And I heard about this law, you are what you love and you love whatever you give your attention to. And I thought, you know, this thing might kill me. Might kill me, it might not. But you know what? I'm not going to die. I'm not going to leave this planet not knowing what it is that I love. I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to die not knowing what it is that I love. Because when I ask you, when I say to you, you are what you love and you love whatever you give your attention to, what do you love? I mean, I got to imagine we're not that much different. You probably don't want to die without knowing what it is that you love, right? So let me take you to the next step in understanding this. Swedenborg says that the spiritual world is the only world that's real. It's the only world that's real. This is an extension of the spiritual world, and it exists as a classroom, as an opportunity for us to learn and grow in ways we can't get in other classrooms. And here, we have things in the physical world because they correspond to a spiritual truth. For example, Swedenborg says that water in the spiritual world corresponds to truth. So the reason that we have good, clear, pure water in this world is because there is such a thing as pristine truth. And the reason we have nasty, ugly, polluted water here is because there's a falsity, a deception, a perversion of truth. So if it exists in the spiritual world, it can exist here. But if it doesn't exist in the spiritual world, there's nothing to hold it together in this world. So in this world, we come here predominantly to learn two things. I'm really dumbing it down because the truth of the matter is that everybody has a life purpose. You have a life purpose, you have a life purpose, we all have a life purpose. And our life purposes vary. You may come here to practice on something different than I came here to practice. But in spite of the fact we have an individual agenda, an individual thing we want to work on, we have a collective agenda too. So we have what I call a universal life purpose and a personal life purpose. So the universal for all of us overlaps. And the universal life purpose for all of us is to learn about these two things. First one is this law. You are what you love and you love whatever you give your attention to. That's why this classroom is created, is for you to learn about this law. The second thing that we're here to learn is who and what we are. And Swedenborg says, you are divine love and wisdom. You don't have it. It's not a possession. I can't take it from you. You can't lose it. It can't be stolen. It can't be misplaced, bent, folded, stapled, mutilated. You don't have it. You are it. And you came here to identify with being divine love and absolutely nothing else. You came here to solve your problems with that identification and that intelligence. So what that means is you no longer say, I'm the person who's broke. I'm the person that doesn't get a raise. Watch, I'm the person that when everybody else gets something from Valentine's, I'll be alone. We come here to realize that when you invoke the divine I am, there's only one appropriate purpose for that, and that is to follow it with the truth. I am divine love and wisdom. And Swedenborg says there is a single point of origin for all of our suffering. Isn't that fascinating? A single point of origin for all of our suffering. All the suffering that's ever been. All the suffering that is. All the suffering that ever will be. There's a single point for all of it. Makes you want to buy the book, doesn't it? And the single point of origin is this. We forget that we're divine love and wisdom, and we identify with something else. And that's the problem. So I spend a lot of time, I have a radio show. of a webcast radio show. Christopher comes on my webcast radio show the first Friday of every month for the Macklin Monthly Report. And the purpose of the website, of the web broadcast, it's on Purple V. When you come to Purple V, see where it says enter site in the middle of the screen, you'd click on that, and then you'd go up to V's chat. And you click on V's chat, and there you go. That'll take you into the chat room. And then you click on register, right down, right, and you'd register and sign in, make a note of your username and password. You'll need that in the future. Then it'll bring you into the chat room where you can chat with a bunch of other people. But go back to the homepage if you would, sweetheart. If you'd go back to the main page. Yeah, get rid of the chat. The other thing you want to do is under V's chat, see where it says listen live? It says Tuesday, Sunday, forget all that. Forget that. Just click on listen live. And when you do, the radio show will start to stream. And my show will start to stream, and if it's a day and a time when it's not my show, then whatever's broadcasting on Contact Talk Radio will stream from my website. That's Contact Talk Radio, and they're all about spirituality and advancing consciousness. So my show is every Friday from 4 to 5. It's an hour. It is commercial-free, and it's all about connecting you with understanding why you're here and healing. And I have a lot of wonderful people that come on, like Christopher, that you can call, and you can ask them questions for free. So you can figure out how to own and operate this human experience thing. But going back to the idea that you are what you love and you love whatever you give your attention to. So everything here exists in a three-dimensional form because it corresponds to something in the spiritual world. That means that you, as spirit, your essence, your divine nature, your spirit, is showing up in the three-dimensional world in a tangible way. Isn't that interesting? So there's a part of you that's never changed. I can't imagine this guy ever feels like he's ever been older than, look at his face, like 7? But for those of us who have had a few more laps around the track, there is a part of us that doesn't feel any different than when we were 5, right? That part of you that is timeless and immortal. So how does your spirit show up in a three-dimensional world? According to Swedenborg, it shows up as your consciousness, as your awareness. That's your spirit. And your spirit is divine love and wisdom. You don't have it, you are it. So that means when you give your attention to something, you're giving it divine love and wisdom because it's inseparable from your consciousness. So when you give your attention to something, you're giving it your love. And when I first heard this law, when I was in my 20s and my gut was degenerating, I knew that my health had something to do with what I was doing with my love, but I didn't know how to put it together. So you know how grossly repetitive our thoughts are. I mean, Lord, if you thought it once, you thought it every day of your frickin' life. So I decided that what I was going to do is I was going to write down all the stuff I give my attention to, because it is grossly repetitive. And I was just going to take one day out of my life. I wasn't going to judge it, wasn't going to criticize it. I was just going to write it down, what I give my attention to. At the end of the day, I looked at all that stuff that I had written down, and I screamed an existentialist scream of horror into the night and said, I am not going to die loving this crap. I am going to take my power back, and I'm going to choose to love something else before I die. But I didn't come to the planet to love this crap and be tortured by this crap. And I'm suggesting that all of you will have a come to Jesus moment yourself at some point. But I'm trying to lay a foundation to ask you to evaluate and treat your consciousness differently. And when you're giving your attention to something worry-based, something that has bad faith in your value, your power, and worth, I'm asking you to stop. Check in, how does that make you feel to give that your love? And is that really what you want to do with your love, or do you want to take your power back? So we come here to remember that we are divine love and wisdom, and that's how we answer our problems. Because as divine love and wisdom, as Michael pointed out, you don't have the power to create a learning experience you don't need. Now, divine love and wisdom can do a lot of things, but create a learning experience of itself it didn't need, isn't one of them. So what Swedenborg is saying is when you remember that you are divine love and wisdom, you can trust that whatever you're creating is exactly what you need when you need it, because you don't have the power to do anything else. What would that be worth to you? What would that be worth to you to stop second guess every decision that you make? What would that be worth to you? Wouldn't that be the truth that sets you free? You can see there's only one way to align yourself with the truth that sets you free, and that's that you have to be the truth that you are and put down every other limiting story about you. That's why you're here, is to find out what your limiting stories are and to say, I'm sorry, I'm choosing not to love that anymore. I'm getting out of bed with that, and I'm getting in bed with divine truth. Besides, nobody knows how to do it to you like divine truth. I wanted to talk before Christopher because there's some things that Swedenborg explains really well that I wanted you to understand before Christopher talks, because I wanted you to have the benefit of Swedenborg's insights so that you're not just listening to Christopher going, but I don't get it, I don't understand, how does this work, this is just weird. So I want to pre-massage your spiritual frontal lobe, if you don't mind. We think of our mind as a private thing, right? We think of our mind as, other than thinking about chocolate and gorgeous love man, nobody else knows what goes on behind this frontal lobe. It's a private thing. We think of it as just something that we're in the privacy of our own thoughts. And Swedenborg says, you know what? It doesn't really work like that. It doesn't work like that at all. He said, your mind isn't really like this private little cul-de-sac. He said, all of us have two residencies. When we're on the planet Earth, you have two citizenships. One is in the physical world. You have a physical body, a physical presence in the physical world. You're a citizen of the three-dimensional world. But your original citizenship is in the spiritual world, because your spiritual existence is the only existence that's real. So you're always occupying some spiritual residency while you're here, if that's making sense. So while we're here, when we give our attention to something that seems benign and harmless at the time, or even justified and warranted, like, I don't have enough money, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and it's a hellishly limited thought, and it takes your nervous system and your mind and your gut to a hellishly limited place. The reason that's happening is because of this law. You are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to. So when you give your attention to something that lives in a hellishly limited realm, your mind becomes an elevator, and you open up your mind. That door opens up at the floor that matches that spiritual community. Now, if you're giving your attention to, I'm divine love and wisdom, this is working for me because I have more power than any of my challenges, because these challenges came to liberate my mind. Life is my bitch. I am not life's bitch. When you come here and you give your attention to things that live in an unlimited place, you feel that. And all the beings that live in that unlimited place, when you open up your elevator that is your mind with your free will, that angelic community has access to you now, and they can help you. And when you give your attention repetitively to, I can't do this. Why am I so unlovable? It's never going to work out for me. A 5-year-old in a coma could have done better than I did. When you give your attention to those things, your mind opens up into that spiritual realm, and the beings in that spiritual world have access to you now. Swedenborg wants you to know, when you open up your mind to a higher level, those spirits respect your privacy, and they respect who you are, and they come for one reason, and that's to help you. Lower order beings want to do one thing, and that's jack with you. Their hard-on, their porno, is to get you to use your free will to hate yourself and your life. That's what does it for them. And your job, you could feel free to take some of my style of talking, Christopher. Make it your own. Your job is to disempower that community. Your job is to say, I am divine love and wisdom. I know what I am choosing to love. This is a definition of a spiritually mature being. They understand this law. You are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to, and they're choosing to give their attention to things that live in an unlimited realm because they got everything they need to from hellish points of view. They don't need to go there anymore and sign up for it. I know a lot of you are thinking, well, but I don't have money, and you're doing this. I'm going to take it here, and I'm just going to defend why I have to keep taking it. And I'm suggesting there's a better way to deal with this. And I'm suggesting that every time you worry, you're assuming that position. And I did it graphically because I want to ask you if that's really what you want to love. When I put it that way, suddenly you're justifying it seems foolish and self-destructive. That's exactly what I wanted to do. As I wanted to put you in a place where you can see that there is no justification for going to a limited place unless you decide you want to learn more from it. And you want those beings in that realm to have access to you. Then worry all you want. Hate all you want. Now, Christopher is going to take you into repercussions that happen in people's lives when they don't know this law, you are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to. That's okay. Let the angels run. We go through life, and not all of us have been perfect. We've given our attention to limited things. And when we give our attention to limited things, we don't live in a vacuum. There are things in those realms that can step in and they can attach to you. And then when you go back to giving your attention to positive things, they don't leave. And they can affect your health. And they can affect your mindset. They can affect your emotions. They can affect your finances. They can affect your relationships because you don't live in a vacuum, because you are a spiritual creature first and foremost. And what determines your life and your world is what you're giving your attention to because of this law. You are what you love, and you love whatever you give your attention to. Christopher kind of talks fast. I know he's got the funny accent. So if he says something and you're not following him, just put your hand up and say, hey, you with the big meat hook, slow down. Say that again. I didn't understand it. Because he's going to give you some ideas that are different. They're new. This is a new way to look at something. He's a guy that has a gift that sees in the spiritual world in the way that most of us don't. So he sees all the things that Swedenborg talked about. He sees things that attach to you or around you that we don't see, that most of us don't even have an ounce of validity for. And he's going to talk about how over the course of your life, you've given your attention to something that opened a doorway for something to attach to you. I'm telling you right now, the only reason it attached to you is because it's working for your growth, because you're divine love and wisdom, and everything here works for your growth. Your job is to not forget that. Your job is to not give your power away. So I'm going to give the platform to Christopher because he's going to take this in deeper detail and explain to you different conditions that can happen to you on a nervous level, on a physical level, when you've given your attention to something that took you to a hellishly limited level. Yes, Michael, my love.
Whenever you're done, I'd like to make one more announcement before Chris goes up. Okay. First of all, I forgot to mention some of these things, but Chris is going to be speaking at Unity on April 19th. And not only is he going to be speaking, I talked to Reverend Diane the other day. She's actually going to be gone that day, so he's getting the keys to the kingdom that day. He's actually going to be leading the service at Naples Unity on April 19th, right? Sunday, April 19th?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, so, come for that one.
That's
And
really great,
one other thing I wanted to say, just to show you the measure of this man, there's another reason why this event wouldn't have taken place, at least in the Naples High School here, if it wouldn't have been for Chris. We were trying to get to high school, and, I was working with Chris Ellison, me and Jameson were working with Chris Ellison, the head of the drama department, and Chris came back and he said, the only way that this event can take place is if it's under the auspices of a nonprofit organization. So I was thinking about it, and what can we do? And then he came back a week later, and he said, we have to have something by tomorrow if you want to get in here. So I was like, oh, my gosh, how is this going to happen? Who's the